Vermonters have always felt very connected to their forested ecosystems. And back in the 1980s, when forest managers and scientists started to notice a widespread red spruce decline, they didn't have a lot of information to understand what was happening or how to remedy it. And so in 1990, a group of individuals from the U.S. Forest Service and from the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, along with researchers from the University of Vermont, came together to establish an organization that might be able to collect the information necessary to understand what was happening in the forested ecosystem and to find some way to organize and efficiently bring together all of the data and information that we already had about these systems. At the time, this was a really novel approach, this systems approach, where we want to see not just widespread mortality and be able to track that and understand that, but we want to see more subtle changes in forest condition and forest processes. And now, over 25 years later, the Vermont Monitoring Co-op is home to one of the longest records and the most diverse records of ecological monitoring data that exists. And this wealth of data is stored in the Vermont Monitoring Cooperative database, which does contain a lot of records that are just being archived, but also contains quite a few records that are available to the public or really to anybody who would like to integrate this existing record of data with their own efforts. And it includes not just measurements about the forests themselves, but also air quality monitoring data, soils data, water quality data, and wildlife data. And the idea is that really to understand how healthy an ecosystem is, you have to really be thinking about all of these different components and how they're functioning as a whole. And in this way, it allows us to track more subtle changes that might be occurring, for example, because of stresses that aren't as acute, like climate change. It's very easy to see if you have an invasive pest that comes through and wipes out a particular species, but to really see how the ecosystem is changing long term is really important in order to manage this forest sustainably into the future. But the VMC mission really encompasses much more than just collecting, organizing, and archiving data. Our overall mission is to help improve our understanding of long-term trends in ecological systems, these forested systems, and that includes understanding relationships among physical, chemical, and biological components. But in order to do that, really the first step is to bring together all of the different people who are doing this kind of work. On VMC's very small budget, there's no way that they could be expected to really accomplish that mission as just as the staff alone. And that's why really I view the VMC as not just the few people who are on the payroll, but actually this much larger collaborative, which includes people from the state, from federal agencies, multiple agencies, from various academic institutions and research institutes, nonprofit organizations, as well as industry representatives. In addition to this organizational diversity, the VMC Collaborative spans a very broad disciplinary range. We have researchers who are focused on air quality, on hydrology, on avian species, on amphibian species, including all of our forest health experts and forestry professionals. So it really is a unique opportunity to bring together people across disciplines to see how our different data sets relate to each other and what they might be telling us about the larger system. So while the VMC Collaborative really is primarily composed of researchers and land managers, particularly at the state Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation, the ultimate goal is for this information to trickle down to, or I should say up to, policymakers and then also out to the general public. So VMC does not have within its core mission outreach to the public, but the idea is that we can help coordinate the gathering of information, which can then be translated through these broader stakeholder groups. And this really captures VMC's primary goal, and it's to bring together this diverse audience of environmental professionals in a way to try to efficiently coordinate all the work that everyone's doing. There are so many of us working in parallel around these issues, and having one organization that can serve as a hub to bring together this multidisciplinary data and all of these different agencies and organizations really helps us to work more synergistically together towards our goals, our common goals. The second goal is to try to take all of this data and information that we can collect and archive and actually make sure that someone is analyzing that again in this sort of interdisciplinary way, bringing together both the physical, chemical, and biological components of these ecosystems and being able to synthesize the state of the forested ecosystem and how that's been changing over time. And again, each of our different organizations has their own sort of synthesis and analyses and annual reports. But the goal of what VMC is trying to do is to integrate all of these different data sets for a more holistic picture. The third and final major goal of the Vermont Monitoring Co-op is to maintain long-term monitoring of these different ecosystem components and the processes themselves. Most research funding is on a cycle of either 2 to 4 years, if you're lucky 5 years. State budgets also tend to fluctuate, so funding from the U.S. Forest Service over these past several decades has really been instrumental in making sure that we can maintain the monitoring, which is again so critical to understanding long-term trends and these subtle changes that might be occurring because of incipient stressors like climate change. And while the VMC database includes a much larger set of data that was not directly collected by the Vermont Monitoring Co-op, VMC staff and VMC dollars have been committed to support specific data streams, from hourly meteorological data to yearly assessments of amphibian and avian populations. And just to give you an idea of how diverse these data sets are, it really does range from urban forest assessments in Burlington, these annual inventories of our permanent forest monitoring plots, and spatial data products derived from satellite imagery about forest health or phenology. So there really is a wealth of information out there that VMC has been collecting and maintaining and has been sharing with the larger forest ecology, forest management audience. To really make this long-term monitoring and this integrated monitoring work, you really have to have intensive monitoring sites so that it's easy to relate those different data sets to each other. And while we have been expanding to include data sets from across the state, and we're currently working to expand across the region since forests don't really live by political boundaries, we do have two intensive sites with a particularly rich data set. One of them is on Mount Mansfield, right along the northern spine of the Green Mountains, and the other is the Liebrook Wilderness area down in southern Vermont. Considering that there really aren't any other long-term or intensive monitoring or research sites within Vermont, these two VMC intensive sites really do provide key information, critical information to understanding Vermont's forested ecosystems. Now, there are some long-term ecological research sites in Massachusetts, neon sites in New Hampshire, experimental forests in New Hampshire and Maine. So we do regionally have these types of monitoring and research locations, but Vermont's forests are unique, and our geology and our climate are different from our surrounding states, and our land use history is different. So really having the same type of quality information is important for Vermont's forests. While the administrative home of the VMC is at the University of Vermont within the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources, it's led by an incredibly dedicated steering committee, which is staffed by leaders from across the organizations that the collaborative is composed of, from the U.S. Forest Service, National Forest Branch, State and Private Forestry Branch, and also the Northern Research Station, as well as members from our Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation and the University of Vermont. The VMC really does have an incredibly dedicated group of collaborators that consistently work together to keep this data monitoring and analysis and synthesis going. But we're always looking to expand those efforts as well. And keeping in mind our three primary goals outlined under our mission statement, there are lots of ways that you could get involved with the Vermont Monitoring Cooperative. The first is just to explore our website. We would love to have you seeing what data is available and what might be useful for you in terms of being able to either download data or if you want to upload and share your own data or archive data. And the VMC does have several different levels of data availability that are available for people who want to upload their data. And really, this is just because too often we see either through retirements or lost data records or computer failures that really high quality data is lost. And making sure that we have all of this information will really help us moving forward in understanding how these forested ecosystems are changing. Another fun and easy way to get involved and connect with the VMC Collaborative Network is to attend our annual meetings, usually each fall, sometimes in December. We bring together the collaborative with a morning plenary where we invite experts to talk about a specific theme or topic that's of relevance to all of us. But then also we have afternoon sessions where different monitoring or research or management activities can be reported back to your colleagues. And we're also always looking for volunteers. Often this involves students or interns that work with us to collect the data and organize the data that we have. And if that's something that interests you, you can always contact us, and our contact information is right here. Any one of these, the three of us, could bring you into the VMC family and see how you could contribute. One great example of this in action is the 2015 UVM NR206 class, who have worked hard this spring in spite of incredible snow depths and duration to go out and collect forest inventory plot data for us so that we can create and assess a new forest species map for the region. And the basic idea is that we have satellite imagery that we can collect from multiple seasons, and having the different seasons is helpful in that it gives us phenology as an additional clue to differentiate species that otherwise may look similar during the growing season, look similar to a satellite. And we use these different images and also a range of transformations to sort of highlight different vegetation characteristics to create these maps of percent basal area for each species, each of the key species in our region. And then, because satellite imagery clearly is not always perfect, there's always error involved in spatial data products, we refine this through an object-based classification, which allows us to sort of create these rule sets to refine the classification. If there are areas that we know can't support the species of interest, either because of elevation or soil characteristics, yet our map is saying it exists, we can use these other GIS data layers to refine and mask out certain areas where we know that's not really possible and the error is showing through. And so ultimately, we'd like to use this in going back in time, thanks to the satellite imagery, to see how forest species composition has changed across the region, and then also try to model what's driving those changes. Is it just natural succession, or do we see changes in land use, or maybe is climate favoring certain species over others? And so this is all being conducted by David Guttix Cross and Allison Adams at the Rubenstein School. It's part of their graduate work. But what we needed was some ground truth data to figure out how accurate these assessments are. And that's what this NR206 class has done by going out and getting inventory data for us so that when we take these final maps of percent basal area that have been refined, we can look and load up their plots and see how well our mapping is working. And this is really critical because without that accuracy assessment, this is nothing more than a pretty picture. And with limited time and resources, we are really indebted to this group for gathering all of this data for us.